Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Protein Matters. And today we'll dive into one of the most pressing issues of our time climate change. Our planet's average surface temperature has risen by about 1.2 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century, primarily due to human activities such as burning fossil fuels or deforestation. The seemingly small increase in temperature has led to significant impacts, including more frequent severe weather events, melting ice caps, rising sea levels, etc. Amidst these challenges, there's a growing recognition of the crucial role that education and technology can play in addressing climate change. From integrating climate science into school curriculums to developing innovative tech solutions, there's a lot we can do. And perhaps most inspiring is the role that teenagers are taking in this fight, from leading climate strikes to creating tech solutions that can reduce carbon footprint. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Mr. Anshuman Bapna, founder and CEO of Terra.do, a leading voice in the fields of climate education and climate tech. Terra.do is an online school focused on combating climate change by facilitating career transitions into climate related fields. Their main 12-week course, Climate Change Learning for Action, has grown to include classes on hydrogen energy, sustainable agriculture, and climate focused investing. Together, we'll explore how young people can become powerful agents of change, leveraging education and technology to build a more sustainable future. Hello, Mr. Anshuman. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Shreya. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
So I was thinking we could split this episode into roughly three parts. We can start off with Terra.do and cover its mission and significance, and then we can shift our focus to the most pressing climate issues and how the youth can become more actively involved. And then lastly, we could cover climate technology around the world.
Sounds good.
So let's get started. Can you share with us how your journey with Terra started and the inspiration behind the organization and the mission of Terra?
Sure. So, Shreya, I was not in climate until about 4 years ago. I have been starting different companies in tech, and I do have two kids. One of them is a 15-year-old daughter right now, and another 10-year-old son. And one of my moments of awakening was some years ago when I took them to Australia to the Great Barrier Reef. And my daughter was old enough to come along with me to snorkel. And I heard her singing in the water, just completely entranced by how beautiful the corals were. And my son was too young at that time, so he was on the boat. And I thought that was okay because we would come back the next year or a few years later. And after all, the belief that we're able to something as magical and as massive as the Great Barrier Reef go. And unfortunately, it turned out that was the first of the many years in which global warming caused about a third of the coral reefs to die. And within a few months, I realized that I had been taking it for granted that the world would be as good, as amazing, as rich as it was for us, as for our kids. And then that opened up my eyes. And so I started looking at the answer to the question on how I could use my skills in climate and didn't find anything great out there. So ended up deciding to start this company. And this company is actually named after it's so the company is Terra. Terra means Earth, but it's also named after a brainstorm on this idea called Cafe Terra in Bangalore, and that's where I met my co-founder as well. Again, funnily enough, because I was speaking to someone else about climate change, and a stranger at the other table walked up to me and said, "If you want to work on climate, then you should talk to my sister-in-law, who has been working in climate for many, many, many years, and she happens to live in Hawaii." So, and then of course, COVID happened. So she and I never met in person for another 2 years, but we started a company together. So there's three of us as co-founders, and we started this company 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
That's so great. So I talked about your flagship 12-week course. So since launching that course, what milestones are you particularly proud of?
Yeah. So I'll tell you why we started this course. Again, I was very much a patient zero for that, which is somebody who was very committed to be working in climate, but also had spent enough time reading research reports, news stories, etc., to know that climate was literally everything under the sun. And very quickly realized that I needed to figure out a structured way to understand all different aspects of climate science, climate impacts, and then jump into solutions, but also understand these solutions to be able to differentiate what are real solutions and what may not be real solutions. So essentially, started this program, the 12-week program, for someone like me, who was very curious, very committed to work in climate, but did not know where to begin. And we started a program with just 20 people in the very first cohort. But these were 20 incredible people. One of them, for example, was a CTO at a $3 billion healthcare company in the middle of COVID, deciding that we would still figure out a way out of COVID, but out of climate change was seemed harder to him. So he wanted to jump into that. Very inspiring people. And since then, that program has graduated about 4,000 people across 80 plus countries. And these are people who are now doing incredible things in climate. Our estimate is that about 50 of them have started different climate companies in India, US, all across the world. And these companies range from somebody who's making alternative proteins to somebody who's doing hydrogen projects to somebody who's making low cost, disaster resilient housing in India to help people in the inevitable hurricanes that intensify because of climate change. There's been this incredible community of people who have gotten built out, and there are now about 100,000 people all across the world who are part of the Terra community in some shape or form.
That's so inspiring. So, looking ahead, what are some exciting developments that Terra is working on to further expand its impact?
There are two or three things that we're very excited about. I think one is we've all heard about AI, right? So now, what's the intersection of AI and climate? I don't know. There are many ways that could happen. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. But one of the things that I've had a sneaking suspicion about is that climate change is a collective action problem as well, right? Which is a lot of us feel the effects, but a lot of us also feel that we are kind of alone and we are the only ones who are thinking about it. We've been lucky enough to create this massive community of tens of thousands of people who are all activated and who want all work in climate. So one of the things we're working on is to use AI to help build a lot more collaboration between these individuals. So imagine an AI assistant sitting inside our community who identifies what Shreya is looking for, what Anshuman is looking for. And while we may not know each other, AI could figure out that, hey, maybe we should be working together on a wastewater treatment project. And so basically connecting the community better together. So that's one thing we're excited about. I think the other is also to bring Terra a lot more into universities. So we haven't. So right now we're focused on professionals, so people who are early or late, mid or late in their careers. But we've never had the chance to go to colleges themselves and be part of the curriculum. And that's just beginning to happen right now. So we just partnered a deal with one of the largest universities in Australia, and we're hoping that we can replicate something like that in the US and in India. So getting closer to the college level. And I think the final thing would be that we're also looking at taking Terra and all the learning that is happening for all things climate inside large organizations. So the idea is that can we go inside a very large organization that has made some big commitment about climate and help every single employee inside there upskill themselves, teach themselves what it means to have their job be a lot more climate centric and sustainability centric. So those are two or three things that I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, that sounds pretty exciting, especially as, a lot of us are going to go to college. I think there are something that we might all be looking for to kind of transition into the climate space.
Yeah.
So I was reading a survey by Earth Day Network found that 80% of teenagers are concerned about climate change, but many lack the resources and guidance to take significant action. So I think empowering them could significantly amplify climate action efforts. So in what ways do you think that teenagers can become actively involved in climate action, both within their communities and on a larger scale?
That's a great question. And I think there are some of the most powerful insights and some of the most powerful action comes from the youth. In fact, my theory of what happened with what changed with climate change in the last 10, 15 years is a lot to do with how activism, especially by teenage activists like Greta Thunberg and others, brought this issue to the mainstream and essentially opened up the eyes of a lot of people, both on the business and the political side, on how critical this was, not just for the polar bears, but for their own children. So I think, first of all, activism, both locally and globally, is a very powerful thing that teenagers can continue to be part of. And activism does not need to be the banner holding kind necessarily. It is essentially taking the conversation to places where that conversation is not happening right now. That could be inside the community, so organizing something in the community clubhouse, for example, which is a talk that allows others to ask and understand what's happening with climate change, is a simple and a very powerful action that teenagers can do. They could also organize a lot, not just in their community, but potentially outside as well. Ways of looking at how in their own ecosystem they can take small actions and show it to the community. But I think even if you go further up and think about the kind of skills that you could acquire as teenagers, you are some years away, but not a lot from being in the workforce. And so, what happens inside colleges where you join clubs or start clubs, and what those clubs do on different aspects of climate and energy and so on. And then, of course, seeing a path to transitioning into potentially climate jobs. That's, I think, very powerful. In fact, the scale of transformation that we're talking about across every single sector is such that I feel that the climate economy is going to be bigger than the internet economy, and therefore, for young teenagers who are trying to figure out where their career paths might lie, I think one of the most amazing places to be looking at is climate, because it's one of the few places where you can combine profit with purpose, and you have potentially a career trajectory which is many, many, many years long, while doing something that is really, really powerful for everyone. So I think this is a great time, and I'm glad that you're kind of covering this as part of your program.
I agree, yeah. So, also a lot of us are very active on social media. 90% of teenagers are active on social media. So, and these platforms have immense potential to disseminate climate education, mobilize
Yeah.
significant action. So, how do you think that these digital platforms can be used to create awareness and enhance climate action?
I think one of the things that I worry about sometimes is that your generation, Shreya, is the generation which is the most activated about and understands how important climate change is. But if it doesn't see solutions out of this mess, then just like all human beings, we'll start turning off. We'll start looking the other way. And I think we have a brief window of opportunity to paint the climate, what's happening with climate, not just as a crisis, but also as an opportunity. And and therefore, that sense of optimism and communicating it in a way that teenagers understand, the youth understand, is both. I mean, the social media platforms are fantastic for that, but the unique voice and authenticity that teenagers have in talking about these solutions and talking about these ways of getting out of this mess that our generation and our generations before have put all of us in. I think that is potentially very, very critical. And I think and I've already seen that on TikTok and Instagram and other places by a lot of youth activists who are doing a fantastic job, and youth scientists who are doing a fantastic job of talking about what's happening.
I'm glad you talked about activism because my next question kind of revolves around that. So, how do you think the schools and communities around us can better educate the youth about climate change in a way that inspires action rather than fear?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, if you look at the name of the company that we chose, it's Terra.do. And the doing part of it is the most critical part. And for us, it's a journey. So, in fact, our programs are also structured like that, which is the program starts out by spending time being completely honest about how dire the situation is potentially. So we have this amazing talk by an oceanologist, Dr. Chip Fletcher, who lays it out and who lays it out so clearly, so much without holding back, that it's often tough for even adults and professionals who have kind of dealt with climate to stomach that. And it's a very powerful moment But that moment is immediately followed by essentially what we call climate psychology, which is if you are setting out on a mission on a challenge like this, you need the stamina of a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 50-year kind of a stamina. So how do you prepare yourself mentally to both look at the reality of how bad the situation is, but also wake up every morning geared up to act on it? So we work through that, and I think the sequence of action and success that we see is that the entire program is geared to get you to create what we call a work plan. And what is a work plan? A work plan is your commitment to yourself on what you want to do in climate. And it's literally a week by week, a month by month summary of what you think is how you will get to decide which particular action path you want to take on. So, for example, that particular plan might say, look, I'm really interested in food and agriculture and its contribution to potentially both climate risks and climate opportunities. Therefore, my commitment is to speak to at least one new person from that industry every week. And I will also make sure that I convert my learnings into a blog post or in a podcast by the end of that. And that will compel me to do that. And the other thing which we also ask everyone to do is to find a buddy. And a buddy is somebody who keeps you accountable to your work plan. So don't do this alone. Do it with someone else who is thinking similarly like you. And the action paths are literally as diverse as it comes. Um, uh, Speaking in your community, being engaged politically is one end of the spectrum, and a completely different end of the spectrum is going out and trying to research and actually work as a scientist, as a field scientist on topics that might need help today. So, for example, if you're living in, say, Bangalore and you have ISC right next door, do they need citizen scientists to go out and tabulate the different types of trees that are there in Bangalore? That's one of the things that you could be working on today to help to put your brick in that whole edifice that needs to be built out. So there are many, many parts. The important thing is not which path you choose. The important thing is that you commit yourself to that path and hold yourself accountable to it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, I agree. So, this question is about climate technology and upcoming, tech startups that are doing a lot in this field. So, are you aware of any exciting new technologies that are making a significant impact, and what can we learn from this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very exciting area. And it's an exciting area because if you step back for a second, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about changing almost half of everything that we do on the planet right now. So the way we do energy right now, we burn fossil fuels and we use that, but people have come up with much better technology than that, right? So solar, wind, and so on. But even there are all kinds of interesting challenges. So, for example, even in energy, you need to figure out how to store energy in a cheap enough way that allows you to, when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing, to still be able to use that. So that's one set of areas, and people are coming up with all kinds of interesting innovations there. Uh, in fact, in one of it goes so far as to there's one company, for example, that the way it stores all this energy is that basically think of it like a tower which has strings attached to it with cement blocks on it. So when there's excess energy, it uses that energy to raise these cement blocks up. And then when it needs the energy back to the grid, it lets those blocks drop. Right? So it sounds very simple, and it is very simple, but that's the kind of thing that people are working on, and that's energy. We also have across every single sector. So imagine in transportation, and we know all the EV revolution that is happening in India right now, and there's tons of different kinds of interesting things that people are doing. But there are new kinds of batteries. So instead of using lithium phosphate batteries or similar kind of chemistry, can we use sodium ion, essentially salt batteries? And there are a lot of companies which are working on that cutting edge innovation, both in China, India, and other places, and so on and on and on. But there are really fun, crazy ideas. So, for example, people are growing seaweed at a massive scale and trying to sink that seaweed once it grows and dies and have it sink back into the bottom of the ocean. and therefore capture all the carbon dioxide that is captured and bury it under oceanic sands. So there's cool tech like that. But there's also a lot of interesting low tech things that people are doing, which are also really powerful. There's, in my opinion, there's still technologies, and they range from reforestation to potentially using just free publicly available data from satellites to figure out where methane leaks are happening from. So you can write a computer program that can look at imagery that ESA or one of the satellites are pushing down and are publicly available, and identify methane, which is a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. And you can detect that and let the authorities know. So there's all kinds of interesting innovation happening, which is software, hardware, people, politics, all across the board.
Yeah, that sounds so fascinating. But what do you think are the main barriers to the widespread adoption of these tech solutions, and how can we address these?
I think if you look at how fast solar and wind, especially, have been, especially solar, it's almost faster than any other tech ever being adopted. I think the challenge, and that's not true for every tech, but so I think first of all, even with solar, the challenge is that the world is progressing so fast, especially in its energy needs, that solar is just about able to keep up and a little bit more than that for the energy needs that the world has as it grows itself. So therefore, even with this massive level of adoption, it's not enough. We need to figure out ways to make it get adopted even faster. And I think there, I feel that a lot of capital, technology, political will, all of that has come together. So that's one of the shiny, happy areas of progress. I think one of the interesting reasons why technology does not get adopted as fast is what Bill Gates recently called the green premium, which is in affluent societies or in pockets in different parts of the world, you can afford to pay a green premium, like have the green technology be slightly more expensive, and that's okay. But if you really want massive scale, you want it to be that green premium to be zero, and in fact, you need the green technology to be cheaper. Now, solar is a great example where that was not the case. In fact, even people working in solar 10 years ago laughed at the idea that solar would actually be cheaper than coal. And turns out that within 10 years, because of innovation, because of scale, costs have fallen so much that now it's actually economically a bad idea to start a coal plant. You're actually better off starting a solar plant. But that's not true for every single technology out there. So there's that. I think there's also, remember that um, there's always also forces that are trying to keep the world the way it is, as opposed to this new form. So whether it's industries that benefit from the fact that from the old ways of doing things, they definitely hold things back. There's also, in general, as humans, there's a resistance to too much change at the same time, and that's true because even if the world around you is changing because of climate, you are also seeing the basis of the whole economy kind of changing because of all these new technologies coming in. So I think there's that resistance as well. So I think that's why I feel that, especially with Terra, our mission is to get 100 million people working in climate. It doesn't matter what those 100 million people, whether they are all scientists or all activists. We need all of them. We need journalists, we need policymakers, we need accountants, we need every single kind of skill possible, because that is the scale of transformation across every societal structure that we need for climate change to truly get solved through rapid adoption.
Right, definitely. So, currently only 16% of climate tech investments are directed towards developing countries, according to the UN Trade and Development Organization. So, I think bridging the gap is essential for global climate resilience and equity. So, how can we ensure that tech innovations are scalable and accessible to both developed and developing countries?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question and a very hard question at that. In fact, if you look at one area where I feel we actually are massively underinvesting, and I don't see, unfortunately, clear prospects of that getting solved anytime soon. It's called, in climate lingo, it's called adaptation and resilience, right? So think of the world as broadly as solutions that solve that reduce carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, and that's called mitigation. And second is adaptation resilience, which are solutions that take into account that the world is changing. It's getting warmer, hurricanes are getting nastier, and so on. And therefore, how do we prepare drought-resistant crops, for example, or early typhoon warning systems, for example, and so on. And the latter uh, affects developing countries a lot more because they're the most affected by climate change. And there is very little capital because there's no business model to help on early disaster relief, right? So that is one area where governments have to step in and need to step in. And that I feel is an area that is actually being underserved right now in a major way. Technology itself, I feel, will diffuse. And I think EVs are a great example where a lot of what happened, in a way, the first set of technology inventions happened in the US and inside labs. And then Chinese manufacturing took that and just scaled that up massively. And while the West used that to make personal automobiles, so the Teslas of the world, India has actually gone down a different path, which is two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which is how India travels. So that same innovation has kind of propagated itself very nicely, and there's a lot that needs to be done. It's propagating quite nicely across the world. So I think that's one of the inequities, the injustices of climate, which is historically countries that have done the least for affecting the climate are actually affected the most by climate, and that disparity needs to be solved potentially at an intergovernmental level, at the UN level, and by creating a fund that allows rich countries to put money into that fund so that poorer countries can actually take that money to help shore up their shorelines and make sure that agriculture is safer from climate resist from climate disasters and so on.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think that is the end of our conversation. But this is a question I ask all my guests. What advice would you give to your younger self?
uh, my younger self, I think I would have. So just to give some context, uh, I had tried to run away from home when I was 16. And I took the first train that I found, and then 2 hours later, I called up my parents because it was my birthday, and I thought nobody cared about my birthday, so I called up my parents 2 hours later to tell them that I've run away from home. And then my mom didn't know what I was. Before I said anything, she said, "Well, your cake is ready. When are you going to come back home?" And I was like, "Give me 2 hours. I'll be back home." Uh, so the advice that I have for myself is that despite that attempt, I think I was not rebellious enough. And there's a lot that you take for granted because of the way the world works. I think as an entrepreneur, I question that a lot. I ask, well, why should the world work this way? I wish I'd done a lot more of that when I was younger, because when you're younger, you are unforgiving in a way, right? And this is what I love about Greta Thunberg. When she berates all these political leaders at the UN, she's not giving some logical argument. She's essentially saying, look, it's a problem that you created. You guys have to figure out how to solve it. If you're telling me your national interests or blah 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 are not allowing you to do ABC, that's your problem. It's not my problem. Go figure it out. So that unforgiving nature that the youth have is one of the most powerful forces in the world, in my opinion. I wish I had tapped into that a little bit more and been even more unforgiving and even more belligerent and rebellious when I was younger.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Um, so yeah, thank you for being a part of this episode. It was an extremely insightful conversation, very inspiring, and I hope all our listeners try to take the first step to try, create some meaningful action in this area. And yeah, and I hope you had a good time.
I did, Shreya. Thank you for your great questions. And yeah, please continue doing what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you so much. And whoever's
Thank you.
tuning in, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And